All right, welcome to Pauper to the People. I have a kind of a spicy one for you today. It's a pretty sweet deck actually, um, but it's also really weird, and I haven't played it at all. So um, you all will get to see me try to learn the deck, make my way through it, really understand it. But here it is. It's called Snowgo, and it's based around the combination of snow-covered basic lands and Skred. And the reason that this deck works so well in the Pauper format, despite playing like 3.5 colors, um, is that the mana bases in Pauper are pretty awkward and clunky, especially for decks that don't run Prophetic Prism or like a bunch of artifact lands and stuff. So basics really aren't that much worse than a lot of the other options, right? Like we're running 8 ways to search out basics between Ash Barrens, which just has land cycling 1, and Evolving Wilds, which you all know and love or hate depending on how many times you've gotten burned by it, by like the land entering the battlefield tapped and stuff. Then we have like Unknown Shores and Shimmering Grotto, which do the same thing. They just filter a color of mana, like filter a colorless into a colored mana. And those are just to round out the mana base and to make sure that we have all the colors we need if we like need to make double red but only have one mountain, or like triple blue but only have 2 islands, or what have you. And then the payoff for running all these snow-covered lands is Skred, which deals damage to target creature equal to the number of snowlands we control. So in early turns, it'll only deal like 2 or 3, but once we get to like turn 5 or 6, it'll deal 5 or 6 damage, which is kind of ridiculous in for 1 mana, and especially ridiculous when you consider the context of the Pauper format. There isn't really anything that gets above a 5/5 regularly, and the 5/5s are actually pretty rare. So this is a very serviceable early game removal spell, and then once you get to the late game, it'll kill literally anything. Because we're running these 8 shuffle effects, we get to play Brainstorm. And if you're not familiar with the concept of the perfect brainstorm, basically what it is you draw 3 cards and you put like 2 cards you don't want, like 2 extra lands or 2 cards that are really bad in the matchup, or like if we have this Battlefield Scrounger that we don't want to draw until like really late in the game, we can put that back. And so we get to draw 3 cards and then put back 2 cards that we don't want. So, effectively we're getting like 2.5 cards for the one brainstorm. Now we don't actually get the cardboard, but the card selection is absurd with the shuffle effect because you don't have to draw the cards you put back, and so that's a big advantage the deck gets over a lot of like other 2-color decks without fetches. And the other, we have 2 other draw engines along with the brainstorms. We have Accumulated Knowledge, which lets us draw a card, then draw cards equal to the number of accumulated knowledges in all graveyards. If you're a standard player, Take Inventory is very similar, although there are a couple of differences. First of all, accumulated knowledge in like the control mirror match is a really difficult card to play with because it counts the number of cards in your opponent's graveyard, the number of accumulated knowledges in your opponent's graveyard, and their accumulated knowledges count yours. So basically, you want to be the last person to cast them. Like you can cast the first one to bait them into starting to cast theirs, and then you cast yours after they've resolved all theirs to draw like 5 or 6 cards each, like per knowledge, and that can just be backbreaking if you're able to force it through a bunch of counter magic. The downside to that, of course, is that because they've cast theirs first, they're getting more card advantage out of it, so it'll be harder to fight through all the counter spells they draw. But that's a weird little sub game that I don't expect to come up too often because most decks in Pauper just don't run this card. Mystical Teachings is our other draw engine. Teachings is just like a tutor for any instant at instant speed, and then we can flash it back. So if we're not under any pressure, we almost always like Teachings for another copy of Teachings, and then like we flash back the first one for something, and then we like wash, rinse, and repeat. And so basically every iteration of casting and flashing it back, we get another copy of Teachings and an instant we want. So it's a really solid way to chain card advantage and eventually win the game. And then our finisher can actually be grabbed by Teachings. Our main finisher is Sprout Swarm. It has Convoke and Buyback. So the first time you cast it, you're paying 5 mana, like 4 colorless and a green, or 4 generic and a green, excuse me. And you're making a 1/1. And then it returns to your hand. The second time, you're paying like any 4 mana, and you're tapping the 1/1 you just made. So with 9 mana, you can make 2 of them. With 12 mana, you can make 3 of them. And then with 14 mana, you can make 4 of them a turn at instant speed, and all without expending any actual cards as resources. And this can get searched out by Mystical Teachings, of course. And so this is how we win the game. We draw the game out really long with a bunch of counter spells and a bunch of removal. And once our opponent's totally out of resources, we just start Sprout Swarming and eventually amass an army and kill them. The other way to win is Battlefield Scrounger, which also serves as a way to stop us from losing if we're about to deck ourselves. Scrounger is just a 3/3 for 5, and it has Threshold, so if there are 7 or more cards in our library, in our graveyard, once per turn we can put 3 cards from our graveyard on the bottom of our library and give it +3/+3. And we can activate this on our turn and our opponent's, so we can like stack our deck 6 cards at a time per turn cycle. And that's great if say we have all 4 accumulated knowledges in the graveyard, but our opponent is like another control deck or a Tron deck, and they're trying to deck us and they still have some resources. If we don't have really any deck, we can like put like accumulated knowledge on the bottom, and then like 2 other cards we want to draw, like 2 counterspells or a Skred and a counterspell on our turn. And then on their turn, we can activate Scrounger again and put like 3 other cards. And then we untap, draw the accumulated knowledge, cast it, draw 4 cards. So our library only has 1 card in it, and we've just completely refilled our hand with the exact 4 cards we need. And we can like wash, rinse, and repeat. So Battlefield Scrounger, if the opponent can't get rid of it, can essentially give us infinite resources in the late game. There is a concern about going to time with this card if we're not able to like push through damage, but once we have the infinite resources, we can just like chain Skreds and Electric Ray and Magma Spray and stuff, and completely just completely decimate our opponent's board, and then this can start attacking and close the game out in like 3 or 4 turns. Pulse of Marauders is great if we want to return it to the, like if our Scrounger gets countered or killed, and we need to like return the Scrounger. And then we can also return Spellstarter Sprite with it, which can be found by Mystical Teachings. And Sprite is like kind of medium, but it does a pretty solid thing in that it's a blocker that also counters a 1-drop, or it's a it's like an attacker that counters a 1-drop. It's not the best card, but it's really solid. Because it only costs 1 and a blue, and because we can often I'm hoping that we can often win with just like 1/1 beats if we can't get our Sprout Swarm going, or if we if like we're struggling to find it because we need the Teachings for more counter spells or whatever. But Sprite is great against the really fast matchups and the really slow matchups, and not super good in between. Which is why we only have 1 in the main, and we have 3 in the sideboard to really like let us board into like full 4 Spellstar Sprites and get all of their 1-drops against like Delver or Elves or Stompy or something like that. Or even like they're great against Burn. Burn has like all the 1-drops, and if we like try to counter a 1-drop and they bolt our sprite in response, it's basically the same thing, you know. So that's great. And then the rest of the deck is basically counter spells. Like Electric Ray and Magma Spray are the only other removal spells in the deck, and they are tutorable by teachings. So Electric Ray can deal with a bunch of 1 toughness creatures on our opponent's side of the table really well. And we can teachings for it if we need to. So against elves, goblins, some builds of Stompy, all that stuff, Electric Ray is fantastic. Against Kuldotha Boros, it's fantastic. And then Magma Spray exiles, which is actually pretty important in certain spots. If you're playing against like a Young Wolf or even just like a Muldrifter out of Tron, because they have the Fangren Marauder and sometimes Pulsive Murasa, or sorry, Haunted Fengraf and sometimes Pulsive Murasa. Like these can exile it, which prevents them from getting it back. Same thing with the like Archaeomancer, Chittering Rats, Ghostly Flicker combo deck. This will exile Archaeomancer to make it so they can't get it back with Soul Manipulation or Reaping the Graves. The rest of the deck is counterspells. Prohibits, like, solid. Memory Lapse is weird, but it's also solid. It just, like, buys us a turn. It doesn't actually counter something, but it'll give us a turn to find an answer for it, like Teachings for a Scrat or something. Or just find a better counterspell. And the reason Prohibit and Memory Lapse are in the deck is because we want to get Snow-Covered Mountains pretty aggressively with our fetch lands, and that makes it difficult to actually cast the OG counterspell. So we're only playing 2 counterspells, despite the fact that it's more powerful than like Prohibit and Memory Lapses. We're only playing 2 of them because it can be difficult to cast in certain spots. And like certain spots, we want to use blue for like counterspell plus Brainstorm, another counterspell plus Accumulated Knowledge, something like that. And so like actual counterspells can be a little rough sometimes. And then moving up the curve, Exclude is great. It just counters a creature spell, but it draws us a card. So this is the way we get like actual card advantage in addition to Accumulated Knowledge and Mystical Teachings. And that's great. And then Rewind is really slow, and it's not great against a bunch of decks. I think I'll be siding it out a lot, but against the like more mid-range and control decks, we can like rewind into a Mystical Teachings in the same turn, and that's just fantastic. We are trying to make the game go as late as possible, so Rewind, and we have a lot of ways to draw cards. So Rewind gives us a way to kind of spend our mana really efficiently on turn 4, or later, you know. Rewinding into a spell is a great way to be able to pull ahead on tempo by like not tempo necessarily, but like pull ahead on, I guess, overall velocity, because we get to like stop something from hitting the board and draw cards, or stop something from hitting the board and stop another thing. It just gives us a lot of flexibility if we can get to 4, and it having it in hand denies us some flexibility if we can't get to 4. So it's probably the card I'm the most concerned about in this list and have the lowest expectations for, but I hope it performs. I already touched on Battlefield Scrouger and like Pulse of Murasa. Alright, so let's focus on the sideboard now. It's pretty straightforward. Because we're a Teachings deck, we have a few silver bullets. Capsize is great against slower decks with like bounce lands, and it's great against Tron decks for like keeping them off of Tron. If we can get to a point where like if they have a slow Tron development, or if we can counter everything, we can like and get like a free turn where they don't cast anything. We can Capsize, buy back their like only copy of a Tron land, and then untap, and eventually we can get, if we get all copies of 2 separate Tron lands off the battlefield, then they just can't assemble Tron ever, because they'll play one of the 2 they're missing and we'll capsize it. And they'll play it again and we'll capsize it. And they'll play another of the 2 they're missing and we'll capsize that. Like they only get one land play per turn, so even if we only cast capsize once per turn, we're fine. But yeah, it's also great against the Ravnica dual lands, like the bounce lands, because it'll set them back more than one land drop. And sometimes we bring this in and we just burn it on 3 without buying it back, I think. Just because it's so good if our opponent has a slow start. If they're on the draw and they play a turn 2 bounce land, we like untap, play our 3rd land, and just leave them with no lands in play with a capsize without buyback. The other silver bullets are Serene Heart, which is pretty much only against Bogles, and it just blows up all auras. Card's great. It basically like resets their board, and it's often like a 3 or 4 for 1, or even more. Another Electric to complement the one in the main, because the card is just really good and really necessary against some of the faster decks in the format. And Rally the Peasants. And like it can still be searched for with Mystical Tutor. Mystical Teachings. And then the rest of the entire sideboard is instants. It's all teachings targets. These have some redundancy because we want to draw them naturally pretty often. Pyroblast and Hydroblast obviously are just for like blue spells and red spells respectively. And we could always teachings for them if we care about mana efficiency once we untap. So that's good. Ancient Grudge obviously deals with artifacts. Great against Affinity. Very serviceable against Kuldotha Boros because it can blow up their lands. And then Spellstutter Sprite I already talked about in conjunction with the one in the main. So that's the deck. When we bring in Spellstutter Sprites, we might be able to decide out either the Sprout Swarm or the Scrounger. I'm not sure yet. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how things play out, what matchups we're playing against, if I notice any unusual card choices in those matchups, what have you. But that's the deck, and stay tuned for videos. I'm going to take you through a league.